Hey there, CJ Math students, and welcome to Notes 2.21 Part 1. So here we have all of our integer operation rules. Remember, they're different for adding and subtracting, as well as multiplying and dividing. These we figured out yesterday. If you have same signs, you have positives, such as -3 times -2 is a positive 6. Whereas here, -3 plus -2 is a -5. If you have different signs, your answer is negative. -3 times positive 2 is -6, or 3 times -2 is -6. Only one of them has to be negative for your answer to be negative. So let's also remember in our toolbox that we have rules for adding and subtracting fractions, as well as multiplying and dividing fractions. Remember, for adding and subtracting fractions, you have to have common denominators. You keep the denominator. We can break up mixed numbers, which we've been practicing, kind of like this, and you can borrow from homes. For multiplying and dividing fractions, you multiply the top and the bottom, so it's not that you keep the denominator, right? For division, you flip the second fraction, then multiply, and you always change mixed numbers to improper fractions. So here you split them up, here you change them to improper fractions. So let's try and go ahead and practice this a little bit. So 8 times -0.25. Well, hopefully you go in your toolbox and say, hey, I know what 0.25 is. It's 1/4. And make sure you remember it's negative. So you're saying 8 times -1/4. How do we make this a fraction? Simply put it over 1. And now we're multiplying straight across. Let me change my times sign to a dot. That way you can see. So we can multiply straight across, or we can go ahead and say, let's cross cancel. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. And now we multiply straight across. So 2 times -1 is -2 over 1. My answer is -2. Sometimes it helps just to ignore the negative sign until the very end. So for instance, in number 2, let's just say, hey, I have different signs negative. So I'll just put a negative sign right there in my answer and then just completely ignore the negative sign. So 1 over 2 times 12 over 1. Look to cross cancel. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 12 divided by 2 is 6. And then multiply straight across. And when I do that, I get 6 over 1, or 6, right? But I know my answer is -6 because I remember to put it in the very answer. So again, here I have different signs negative, but I have a couple things going on. First, I have a negative, so I know my answer will be negative. But secondly, I have a mixed number here. If you go back up to your rules, what do you have to do with mixed numbers when you divide? Oh, you got to change them to improper fractions. So let's do that first. So 1 times 3 is 3, added to 1. This is really -6 divided by 4 over 3. Now what do I do when I'm dividing fractions? Oh, remember, I flip the second fraction and I multiply. So let's first make that a fraction by saying -6 over 1. So I have -6 over 1. Let's flip the second fraction times 3 over 4. Now let's look to cross cancel. We can here. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And now let's look to multiply straight across. So 3 times 3 is 9. 1 times 2 is 2. I can say my answer is -9 over 2. Or I can say my answer is, how many times does 2 go into 9? Well, it goes in there 4 times with 1 left over. So I can say, or -4 and 1/2, right? All right, let's move on down to this. So using the distributive property, so it is possible to try and multiply these fractions by splitting them up. So saying, hey, if I just want to do -6 times 5 and also -6 times 1/3, I could get the same answer as if I changed this to an improper fraction. So let me show you how. So -6 over 1, first of all, times, what's this as an improper fraction? 5 times 3 is 15. So 16 over 3. Let's do this problem in 2 ways. So here I'm going to get 30, or -30, excuse me, plus 6 over 3. So 6 times 1/3. So 6 over 1. Let's go ahead and cross cancel. That becomes a 1. This becomes a 2. Multiply straight across. What do I get? I get -2 over 1, or -2. So here I get -32. By saying, hey, I'm going to do -6 times 5 and -6 times 3. Or here, I can do the same thing and cross cancel, divided by 3, so I get 1 there. and I get 2 here, and I multiply straight across, and I get, look at this, negative 32 over 1, which is still negative 32, right? So I can either decide to say I want to do the negative 6 times the 5, or then the negative 6 times the 1/3, or to change that to an improper fraction and take it from there. Let's try number 5 here real quick. Let's do it with the distributive property. So let's do 9 times negative 3, and then 9 times, remember, if this is negative, that's a negative 1/2. So 9 times negative 3 plus, right, 9 times negative 1/2. When I do that, I want to put this over 1 so I can actually multiply it. So this gives me negative 27 plus 9 times negative 1/2 going straight across, right, is going to give me negative 9 over 2. Now that's going to be kind of hard to add to negative 27, so let's change that to an improper, or a mixed number, excuse me. 2 goes into 9 4 times with 1 left over, so plus a negative 4 and 1/2. Super important to keep track of your negatives, right? So when I add that together, I get negative 31 and 1/2. Okay? That's the end of part 1.